A man with Alzheimer's wakes up. He says his daughter's name for the first time in years. And 2 days later, he's gone. A woman in a hospital bed feels her left hand start unbuttoning her gown on its own. And across town, a calm, polite man insists that he's already dead, and his brain scans show something no one expected. These aren't horror stories, they're real, documented cases medicine still can't fully pin down. And if you like true stories that sound impossible until you learn that they actually happened, you're in the right place. This is 10 real medical mysteries, strange, rare, and still debated. It was Christmas Eve, 1999, and the nurses at a hospice in Rapid City, South Dakota were trying to keep spirits high. The lights were dimmed, wreaths hung quietly on the doors, and a choir of kids from the local church made their way down the hallway, singing carols to the residents. Inside room 214, Ward Porterfield hadn't spoken a full sentence in years. Diagnosed with Alzheimer, stroke history, brain damage from a motorcycle crash decades earlier, his doctor said his brain had withered. His scan showed profound atrophy. His daughter Kay sat beside him holding his hand, and at this point he had no idea who she was anymore, and he was refusing to eat. So Kay tells one of the nurses, just bring him Jell-O. Red Jell-O. He likes that. And he began to look at her. He took a breath and says, "So, I suppose Jell-O will be my last meal. You're gonna try to starve me, eh?" And Kay froze. That voice, that wit, that was her dad. And for the next 2 days, he was back. He told stories, he recognized his daughter, he sang, half-hummed along with the carols, echoing through the halls, and when the choir passed his room, he cried. A nurse told him, "Don't be sad." He said, "If you were in my position, you'd cry too. These are the last Christmas carols I'll ever hear." And 2 days later, he slipped into unconsciousness, and then he was gone. And that moment was so shocking, it was so specific, and it was so unlike anything that Kay had seen during his long decline. And Kay wondered if she imagined it, but she hadn't. The nurses saw it too. And what she experienced has a name: terminal lucidity. It sounds like sci-fi, but it's not. It's real, and it's weirder than it sounds. Terminal lucidity is a documented phenomenon where people with severe dementia, brain damage, and even long comas suddenly become lucid in the days or hours before death. They speak, they recognize loved ones, they share memories, final thoughts, and then they die. In 2009, German biologist Michael Nahm gave it a name and collected dozens of cases. One woman with advanced Alzheimer's who hadn't spoken in months suddenly looked at her daughter and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart, everything is going to be fine." And later that night, she died. A man with brain cancer hadn't moved or spoken in for 2 years. And the day before he passed, he sat up and asked for his wife. He held her hand, then he slipped away. And hospice reports suggest many who become lucid like this pass within a day. Clinicians call it a paradox because in many cases, the brain is too far gone to explain what's happening. There are theories, sure. It's described in case series and caregiver reports more than lab studies, but the pattern is hard to ignore. Maybe it's the last burst of neurotransmitters, maybe the brainstem's final surge. But the more we learn about the brain, the more this doesn't make sense. How does someone with no short-term memory, no cognitive function, no language control, suddenly become themselves again? And more importantly, why? Some neuroscientists now wonder if consciousness is less about the hardware and more about something we haven't figured out how to measure yet. Whatever it is, Kay doesn't care about the wiring. She got 2 more days with her dad. He looked her in the eye, called her his daughter, and told her he loved her. And then he was gone. And years later, she found a paper on terminal lucidity and realized that she wasn't alone. Nurses told her, yeah, it happens, not often, but not rare. Some call it a miracle, some say it's the mind overriding the body's collapse. And Kay says maybe it was both, one final encore, and she calls it a gift. Stories like Kay's remind us how unpredictable the human body can be. Sometimes the mind returns just long enough to say goodbye, and other times it stops asking permission, and a hand begins to act on its own like it belongs to someone else. A woman named Karen is sitting in a hospital chair. Her left hand begins unbuttoning her shirt, one button at a time. The doctors blurt out, "Karen, what are you doing? Your hand's undressing you."
What are you doing?
Until that moment, Karen hadn't realized it was happening. Her own hand was moving on its own. Confused, the doctor grabs the phone and calls for backup. "Mike, you've got to get in here right now. We've got a problem." Karen had epilepsy since childhood. At 27, she finally did the big surgery, a corpus callosotomy. Surgeons cut the thick cable of nerves that lets the two halves of your brain talk to each other. The goal was to stop seizures. And it worked. No more electrical brainstorms. But within hours, something weirder rolled in. Karen witnessed the loss of control in her left hand. That's what she said.
"Can you lift your hands up in the air? How about the other hand? Can you lift your left hand in the air? Can you give me a thumbs up with this hand? Give me a thumbs up."
Imagine watching your own hand move with purpose, but not because you told it to. The doctors already had a name for this. They called it alien hand syndrome. First described back in 1908, it's so rare that only a few dozen well-documented cases exist in all of medical history. And for Karen's case, her day-to-day life turned into a tug-of-war with a stranger who lived at the other end of her arm. She'd light a cigarette, and the left hand would pluck it away and start waving it around. She'd dial a phone number, and the left hand would hang up mid-call. And her coffee would get dumped, her purse would get emptied without her noticing. More than once, the left hand smacked her across the face hard enough to leave a bruise. And out in public, Karen had to either sit on her left hand to keep it quiet or have her right arm hold the left hand to get through a conversation. And when she walked down the street, her left leg would sometimes join the rebellion, veering off like it had somewhere else to be, forcing her to walk in circles. I mean, you could laugh because it does sound absurd. Karen laughs when she can.
You gotta admit it. How can you not think it's funny?
Now, you might be thinking this sounds kind of familiar. If you've seen Dr. Strangelove, you know the gag. For Karen, it wasn't a gag, though. It was Tuesday. The same frantic tug-of-war, the same desperate fight to keep one hand from betraying the other. Seriously, there's a special kind of fear that comes from not being able to trust your own body. So, what is exactly happening in her head? Well, that corpus callosotomy, the surgery that Karen had, is done to treat severe epilepsy, seizures that jump from one hemisphere to the other through that nerve bridge. By cutting or partially cutting that bridge, doctors effectively stop the seizures from spreading across the brain. And once it's severed, it doesn't regenerate and those nerve fibers don't ever grow back. Instead, the two halves of the brain just kind of adapt. And over time, new, smaller connections form elsewhere. So when the corpus callosum gets severed, the two teams can't coordinate. Normally, they balance each other out, and in Karen's case, each hemisphere started acting like a separate person. So here's the part you won't believe until you see it. The alien is often the left hand, so why the left? The best guess is the right hemisphere, cut off from language and your inner narrator, can still plan and execute movements. It's just, it doesn't have to tell you about it anymore. So it just acts. And the other half of your brain, the half that makes you feel like you, finds out at the same time that everyone else does. One neurologist explained it perfectly. Break the connection and your brain becomes almost two independent people sharing one body. Your intent and your actions can separate. And that's the nightmare that Karen lived in. And then it got personal, as if your own hand having a mind of its own couldn't get any more personal. Karen started to see a pattern. Her alien hand went wild, mostly when she did something she considered bad. Swear, slap. Light a cigarette, yank, out it goes. Be rude, and the hand would correct her. She joked that the left hand was trying to make her a better person, like it had rules. It was like a conscience, almost. Her left hand acted most when she did things that she felt were wrong. And case reports describe dangerous moments. Throat-grabbing, object snatching, self-hitting. Usually brief, but pretty frightening.
They can't. It just seems to go out and it grabs it every time. And I don't know why. It's as though this isn't my hand.
So what science can't do yet is tell you why a given injury becomes this exact syndrome, in this exact way, with this exact character to the movements, while a similar injury in another person doesn't. It can't flip a switch and give you back your agency. There's no standard cure. Doctors try anxiety meds, movement-suppressing drugs, even behavioral hacks. give the hand a ball to hold, occupy it so it's less free to roam. And sometimes they help, but sometimes they don't. In Karen's case, years later, a sedative used for seizure control helped quiet the right hemisphere. Not a miracle, but enough relief so that she could finally breathe again. Enough to do a BBC interview and talk about the bizarre half-life that she'd been living. Karen stopped driving, crowds were a liability. She said flatly that I can't even go grocery shopping because it scares people. And she wasn't wrong. Imagine reaching for apples while your other hand hurls them across the aisles. Privacy evaporates when your own body won't cooperate, so does dignity. And that's what Alien Hand steals. But she adapted. She learned the tells and the moods. She trapped the hand under her thigh in restaurants, and she warned her friends. She kept her humor where she could find it. And around the world, a handful of people have lived through this strange fight with their own bodies. One man woke in the middle of the night to find his rogue hand gripping his own throat. Another grabbed a syringe from his doctor and injected himself before anyone could react.
The left hand doesn't want to do its job, so it has to get punished.
He would have a struggle, and it was obvious he wanted the light off, and his left hand was turning it on.
Bad hand.
So what is alien hand syndrome really? It's proof that the you inside your head is a coalition and not a king. Most of the time, the coalition agrees, and when it doesn't, when the bridges are cut, you get a glimpse of the machinery running backstage. You see, movements can be planned and executed without your permission, and you feel how fragile the sense of ownership is over your own actions. And if you're Karen, you live with that knowledge every day. She handled it for 3 decades. That's half a life spent negotiating with a limb. Half a life of little ambushes, coffee dumped, calls cut short, buttons flying, cheeks stinging, punctuated by small victories like finding a med combo that finally dialed the chaos down. Most people will never meet someone with alien hand syndrome, and most doctors won't either. But Karen's story changed how neurologists think about agency, free will, and the borders of the self. Because once you've seen a hand move on purpose without its person's consent, you realize the brain isn't one simple, unified thing. But sometimes, when control cracks, belief can crack with it. Sometimes so completely, a person is certain that they're already gone. Like one man who became absolutely convinced he was already dead. And the strangest part was that his brain scans almost agreed with him. This is Cotard's Delusion, the story of Graham, the man who believed that he was actually dead. 9 years after a serious attempt on his own life, a British man known publicly only as Graham woke up convinced his brain had died. He told doctors, "I just feel empty," and that he no longer existed in any real sense. He told psychiatrists that my brain is dead. My body just doesn't know it yet. When they brought him food, he refused it and said, "Why would a dead man eat?" When they urged him in the shower, he said, "The dead don't smell." And eventually, Graham began spending hours in a nearby cemetery. He said he feels peaceful there. It's where he belongs. He wasn't panicked or aggressive. He was calm, polite, and eerily logical. So the doctors assumed it was depression, maybe a lingering delusion. So they figured medication and time would help, so they let him go. But what baffled them later was how coherent he really was about it. He wasn't hallucinating, he wasn't confused, he was just certain that he was dead. And he wasn't the first person to experience this. The condition is named after a 19th century French neurologist, Jules Cotard, who described it as le délire de négation, the delirium of negation. People with Cotard's delusion truly believe that they are, or at least parts of them, are gone. Like no blood, no organs, and no life. Some even believe that they're immortal, trapped in a body that should have already died. But in Graham's case, it's one that changed how science looks at the human sense of self. His psychiatrist reached out to a neuroscientist by the name of Dr. Stephen Lauries in Belgium. Lauries had studied people in comas, people emerging from vegetative states, even those in near-death experiences. But Graham was awake, he was alert, he was holding conversations, and he was claiming to be dead, so they ran a PET scan to check his brain's metabolism. And when the results came back, everyone froze. Lauries said, "I've never seen anyone on his feet interacting with such an abnormal scan." The PET scan showed immense reduced metabolism, patterns more like deep sedation than a typical awake brain. He was a walking paradox, a man convinced that his brain was gone, and the PET scan almost agreed. So what does science think happened? The leading idea is that Cotard's delusion hits the brain's default mode network, the circuit that creates a sense of self. Combine that with the dysfunction in the insula, which tells you how your body feels inside, and the parietal lobes, which orient you in space. And then you get a brain that stops feeling alive. Think about it like this. Think of your brain like a house with lights. One set of lights lets you see what's around you. That's the parietal lobes, helping you know where you are and where your body is in space. Another set of lights helps you feel what's going on inside. That's the insula, letting you sense things like hunger, heartbeat, warmth, and emotion. Normally, both stay on, so when you stare at the mirror, you can feel like someone's home. But in Cotard's delusion, it's like someone flipped those switches off. The house is still standing, but it feels dark and empty inside. Something abnormal produces an intense feeling, profound numbness, and the mind builds a belief to explain it. So the person thinks, I can't feel myself anymore, I must be dead. And to Graham, that was his only explanation, that he must be dead. Psychologists call this two-factor delusion. There's still no perfect fix, but some treatments have brought people back. Electroconvulsive therapy, the same one that movies love to demonize. And if you're wondering why, well, back in the day, ECT really did look brutal. It was often done without anesthesia, so patients would thrash, bite their tongues, and even break bones. And then Hollywood really turned that reality into legend. Remember the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest? It sealed it forever as a symbol of medical cruelty. But modern ECT looks nothing like that. Today, it's done under anesthesia, fully monitored, and it's actually one of the most effective treatments for Cotard's delusion. The only shocking part now is how well it actually works. Antidepressants and antipsychotics can also help when the delusion grows out of severe depression. And in Graham's case, it took years of medication and therapy before he slowly started to recover. He doesn't visit the cemetery anymore, but he remembers that time vividly, saying, "It was like my emotions had gone. It felt like I had lost my soul. Things just feel a bit bizarre sometimes. I'm not afraid of death. We're all going to die sometime. I'm just lucky to be alive now." Cotard's delusion is terrifying because it flips one of our deepest assumptions, that being alive is something you just know. So yes, Graham survived his own death, but he also reminded scientists that being alive is a story your brain tells you every second. If the self can dim until life feels absent, the senses can also flare, loud enough to wake you up with a bang that no one else hears. Our next story is a medical mystery that goes the opposite direction. When your brain wakes up in the middle of sleep and what you hear is an explosion. And no, it's not what you think.
Catch!
Get ready for a surprise!
So picture this. You're calm, lying in bed. It's 2:47 a.m. The room's dark, the house is quiet. You're just about to drift off when it happens. Boom! A gunshot and an explosion inside of your head. You bolt upright, your heart's racing, your chest's tight, and your ears are ringing, but the room's still. There's nothing burning, there's nothing broken. So you call out, and of course, nobody answers because no one else hears it. Welcome to exploding head syndrome. For most people, it happens once or twice, and that's about it. But for some people, it doesn't stop. It's one of the most famous documented cases coming from psychologist Dr. Brian Sharpless. He published a report about a 57-year-old woman who heard gunshots, cymbals, and explosions inside her head multiple times every night. She's unnamed in the literature, so for the sake of story, let's call her Linda. It started as one loud crack in the night. She thought it was fireworks. The next night, it happened again, only louder. Then it kept coming back, over and over. Every time she started to fall asleep. Gunshots, cymbal crashes, explosions. Sometimes she'd even see a flash of white behind her eyes. For weeks, she barely slept. She stopped reading in bed, stopped turning off the lights. She would sit up waiting for it, praying that it wouldn't happen again. Her husband couldn't hear a thing. Doctors ruled out tinnitus. They ruled out a stroke, aneurysm, everything. Everything was normal, but she was terrified. Linda told researchers that I thought I was going mad. Every night I braced for another explosion. It got so bad that she developed insomnia and panic attacks. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to surrender to sleep. because that's when the detonations came. After months of living like this, a sleep specialist finally gave her an answer. Exploding head syndrome. They told her it was harmless, that her brain was just misfiring during the moment between wakefulness and sleep. So the doctors prescribed a little bit of reassurance and a mild antidepressant, and it helped, slowly. The explosions faded, first to 1 a week, then 1 a month. And today, she sleeps again. But she says, sometimes I still flinch when I close my eyes, just in case. It's a funny name, right? Exploding head syndrome. No one's head actually explodes, but for people like Linda, it can feel like their sanity does. People who've experienced it say the same thing. It sounds real, louder than fireworks, and it creates instant panic. Some describe a car crash, others hear cymbals, sometimes even a deep cinematic boom, followed by a flash of light behind their eyes. It lasts less than a second, but the terror can last for hours. In one study, nearly 1 in 5 people said that they've experienced at least one episode. That's millions of brains doing this strange little trick. And honestly, this happened to me more than once. I'd be sleeping and become startled. I heard a loud bang. I felt like the furniture came crashing down, and I would jump up, I'd look around, and it's silence. It's the strangest feeling. Sleep researchers think it's a glitch in the system, a neural hiccup. Right before you fall asleep, your brain starts powering down your senses, one by one. But sometimes, something misfires. The part that shuts your hearing off sends a massive burst of electrical activity through your auditory circuits. And all those neurons fire off at once. Doctors classify this as parasomnia, a sleep disturbance similar to sleep paralysis or hypnic jerks. Oh my God, have you guys ever had sleep paralysis? Let me know in the comments. That phenomenon is terrifying.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
But look, it's not rare, right? 1 of 5 people experience it. It's just underreported, because most people don't even know it had a name. Sounds like a metal band, feels like a heart attack. When actually, what's happening here is that it usually strikes when you're stressed, you're sleep deprived, or you're just running on caffeine and anxiety. Your brain's tired, but it's wired, so it messes up. That's why it's common in college students, shift workers, and anyone who hasn't had a decent night's sleep in weeks. Some people even find that it disappears completely once they know what it is. Because knowledge kills fear, right? Because once you give the monster a name, it usually backs down. You ever hear of the guy who just caught fire? Not from a gas leak, not from a dropped candle. Literally burst into flames, burned almost completely, and the room around him was fine. Descriptions of spontaneous human combustion stretch back nearly 400 years. The earliest widely cited case comes from 1641 when Danish physician Thomas Betharlin documented a woman in Paris who, according to witnesses, burned to ashes in her own kitchen, while the wooden furniture around her remained completely untouched. By the 1700s, these accounts had become common enough that physicians were publishing entire papers on the phenomenon. One of the most famous was the 1744 death of Countess Cornelia de Bondy, who was found as a heap of fine ash with her legs still in their stockings. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, dozens of similar cases appeared across Europe and America, all repeating the same eerie pattern. Bodies consumed almost entirely, surroundings left inexplicably clean. Even Charles Dickens weighed in on the phenomenon in his 1853 novel Bleak House. He famously kills off the character Mr. Crook by spontaneous combustion, reduced to a greasy smear and a pile of ash on the floor. Critics mocked him for using what they called a ridiculous superstition, but Dickens doubled down. He insisted the effect was real, pointing to medical reports and coroner's recordings from the 1700s and 1800s. In one fiery rebuttal, he wrote, "I shall not abandon the facts until there shall have been a considerable spontaneous combustion of the testimony on which human occurrences are usually received." For readers of his time, that sealed it. If Dickens believed it, it had to be possible. But let's talk about a more modern occurrence. It happened in Ireland in 2010. The man's name was Michael Faraday. 76 years old, quiet neighborhood, middle of the winter, and one night, his neighbors smelt smoke. No flames, just a faint scent of something burning. A few hours later, firefighters broke down his door and found him in the living room, or what was left of him. His body was almost completely reduced to ash. But the weird part was nothing else had been burned. The TV was fine, the curtains were fine, the newspapers right beside him were barely singed. Just a single circle of blackened floor and a scorch mark on the ceiling above. No accelerants, no candles, no heater knocked over. The fireplace was cold, and the matches over on the mantel hadn't even been used. The coroner, Dr. Kieran McLaughlin, went through every possibility he could think of. After rolling them all out, he wrote something in his report that almost no one ever writes anymore. This fits into the category of spontaneous human combustion, for which there is no adequate explanation. It's one of the only official rulings of spontaneous combustion in modern history. But when you picture it, it doesn't make sense, right? If you're picturing a crematorium's heat, you're not wrong. Reducing a body like that usually takes very high temperatures over hours. So how do investigators explain rooms that don't look torched? One leading idea is called the wick effect. Body fat melts, soaks in the clothing, and the person burns like a slow candle. It's been demonstrated on animal tissue and modeled in forensic work. Once ignited, a small contained flame can quickly consume a body without flashing over the room. But it still needs a spark, a cigarette, an ember, a heater, something. In some cases, that source is obvious, but in others, it was never found. And here's the thing, Michaels wasn't the only one. A woman in Florida named Mary Reeser was found in her apartment the same way. Her body was gone, only 1 foot remained, still inside a shoe. Investigators blamed a cigarette, said that she must have fallen asleep smoking, but they never found a cigarette or any trace of what started it. And years later in Wales, another man named Henry Thomas burned the same way. Body gone, legs untouched. Fire investigators pointed to that wick effect. Over the years, people have blamed everything from static electricity to ball lightning. People would even say that it was divine punishment because you drank too much. But modern experts don't buy that. They still can't explain why so many cases follow the same strange pattern. Always alone, always seated, and the surroundings almost untouched. I mean, if you were to Google the photos, read the reports, you can understand why this refuses to die as a story. Small flames, quiet rooms, and a person alone in a chair, and an aftermath that looks impossible. Maybe every case starts with a tiny ember that we can't see. Or maybe some puzzles are just that. Puzzles until better evidence shows up. Now, not every mystery is destruction. Some wire the senses together in ways that rewrite reality. Taste, sound, color. Have you ever met someone who could literally taste words? Not metaphorically, I mean every word you say actually has a flavor. There's a guy in England named James Wannerton, and this is his world. When he hears the name Martina, it tastes like tuna. Christmas tastes like bacon, jail tastes like cold bacon grease, and he once joked that every conversation is like eating a 3-course meal. He's not kidding.
Some of our names then, let's if that's all right. I mean, I don't want to make this look like some sort of circus trick. I mean, I do appreciate that it's just a sort of demonstration here. But if you say my name, Philip Schofield, what happens there?
Well, the Philip part of your name actually gives me the taste is not dissimilar. Because bear in mind, these are textures and tastes I get automatically and involuntary. I then have to articulate them into a food stuff. Yeah. Okay. Your name tastes like, it's a bit like the orange pith, you know, the white stuff you get in an orange. But the Schofield bit is quite nice as well, because it's like a nice crunchy biscuit kind of taste.
That sounds lovely. Mine's not particularly nice though, is it?
It's not as nice as Philip. It's sort of a vegetable kind of texture. It's a bit like a very, very thick leaf that you can bite. A bit like, I was explaining to Jamie earlier, it was a bit like a cactus leaf. You know those big thick leaves?
Yeah.
You can get a slightly bitter taste from it. That's what I get.
Chris Evans, you say it's Spangles?
Yeah, I saw him, man. I got a very strong taste of Spangles. He was very, very strong.
James has a condition called synesthesia, one of the strangest and most fascinating mix-up the brain can produce. Basically, the wires in your brain are crossing. Hearing, sight, touch, even emotion start bleeding into each other. Some people hear sounds and see colors, others look at numbers and feel personalities. For James, words trigger flavors. He can't stop it. When you talk to him, he's politely nodding while tasting every syllable that leaves your mouth. Scientists call his version lexical gustatory synesthesia, and it's rare. But there are dozens of other forms. Chromesthesia, when sound turns to color. grapheme color, where letters take on hues, even mere touch, where watching someone get touched makes you feel it too. And it's real. Brain scans show that when James hears a word, the part that processes sound lights up, and so does the part that handles taste. Crazy, right? The imaging shows cross-activation. You hear a word, and the auditory cortex lights up, and so does taste cortex. And it's funny to think that scientists actually think that everyone starts their life with their brains a little cross-wired, and that most of us just untangle it over time. No one knows why certain connections stick or why words taste like cherries, and one tastes like chocolate milk. It's automatic, and it's hardwired. As a kid, James thought everyone's brain worked that way. He'd tell teachers their names tasted funny and thought he was being cheeky. He's not alone. An artist named Carol Steen sees colors when she hears music or feels pain. Once during acupuncture, she saw ribbons of orange and red and later painted exactly what she saw. Neurologist Dr. Richard Zatoic calls synesthesia a window into perception itself. He says it proves the five senses aren't separate, they're overlapping neighborhoods in the same city. Most of us just live with those walls intact. People with synesthesia, called synesthetes, live in an open floor plan version. No boundaries, just one big connected space. And it's not always easy. James says it's like living with your senses on overdrive. Imagine a concert where every note has a color, every word a taste, and every emotion has a texture. He's learned to enjoy it without letting it overwhelm him. And it is possible that we're born with that wiring and maybe life just snuffs it out of us. Synesthesia shows how the brain can connect things that were never meant to meet. Sound and color, taste and words, and where some connections cross too much, others disconnect, leaving the face of your child feeling wrong. There's a woman who gives birth to her first baby. It's a healthy, beautiful little boy. But a few days later, she starts to panic. Something feels off. She looks at her baby and says, "That's not my son." Everybody laughs at first, and they think it's postpartum stress, but she insists. Yes, it looks like him, but it isn't him. She says that the hospital must have swapped the baby for another one that looks identical. But it doesn't stop there. Soon she's saying that her husband, her parents, and her friends have all been replaced. The woman goes on living like that for years, feeding her child, bathing him, but never once believing that he was really hers. She loves her real son, she says, but this one's an imposter. And that's Capgras syndrome, one of the strangest things a human brain can do. It's a rare delusional disorder where someone becomes convinced that the people closest to them, sometimes even their pets or objects, have been replaced by perfect duplicates. The same face, the same voice, same everything except the feeling. It was first described in 1923 by French psychiatrist Joseph Capgras, who called it the illusion of doubles. He had a patient who believed her husband, her neighbors, even strangers in town had all been replaced with identical imposters. To her, the world was full of copy-pasted people. So what's exactly happening? How can your brain trick you into thinking that your wife or kid was replaced and is fake now? Turns out, when you see a face, your brain takes two separate routes. One route, the visual one, will tell you that a person is. The other one, the emotional one, gives you that spark of familiarity. That's my mom. That's my best friend. In Capgras syndrome, the emotional pathway misfires. You recognize the face perfectly, but it doesn't match the feeling. It's like the emotional connection's been unplugged. And when your brain can't make sense of something that big, seeing your loved one and feeling nothing, you invent a story that does make sense. This can't be really them. It's someone pretending. Neuroscientist V.S. Ramachandran once studied a patient who looked at his parents and said, "They look like my parents, but I know they're imposters." So Ramachandran hooked him up to a machine that measures skin conductance, basically emotional response. When the patient saw a photo of a stranger, there was a normal reaction. When he saw his parents, there was nothing. There was no sweat, no heartbeat change. The emotional circuit was silent. But here's the strangest part. When he talked to them on the phone, he recognized them instantly. Hearing them used a different connection, one that still worked. And that's how precise this glitch is. He could love their voices, but not their faces. For the woman who thought her baby was an imposter, it got worse before it got better. She eventually became convinced that everyone around her had been swapped out, sometimes overnight. Doctors tried medication, therapy, even antipsychotics, but nothing worked. And finally, in a last-ditch effort, they tried electroconvulsive therapy. After a few sessions, something shifted. She looked at her baby again and said quietly, "That's my son." Imagine looking at the people that you love the most and feeling nothing. No recognition, no comfort, just an uneasy sense that something is definitely wrong. And your mind whispering that maybe that's not really them. It's the heart forgetting what the eyes still remember. And some mysteries linger for decades, not in the mind, but in the body itself. She used to bathe 3, sometimes 4 times a day. She would scrub her skin raw, changed her clothes twice before leaving the house, and still people noticed. At work, people would whisper, "What's that smell?" And she heard it every time. Her name's Kelly Fideau White, a radiographer from England, and she's one of the few people on the planet born with a condition called trimethylmermeria, better known as fish odor syndrome. Now, I know what you're thinking. It sounds like a joke, but it's not. It's a metabolic glitch that sometimes gives your body an odor like rotting fish, onions, or garbage, no matter how clean you are. Soap doesn't help, perfume doesn't help because it's not on the body, it's in the body. And here's how it works. When most people eat foods like eggs, beans, or fish, the liver breaks down a compound called trimethylamine. In Kelly's body, that process never happens. The chemical builds up and escapes through her sweat, breath, and urine. And the smell is constant and completely out of her control. She first noticed it as a teenager. Showers didn't help, deodorant didn't help, perfumes wouldn't help. She thought maybe it was her diet, so she cut out everything: meat, dairy, coffee, even chocolate. Nothing worked. She says you can smell yourself even after showering.
Ridiculous amounts of showering. And I think one of the problems was I was using a very strong body wash with eucalyptus and mint in it. And I'm not sure you can imagine combining that smell with onions and fish. And I can imagine it was quite uncomfortable for my colleagues at work.
I mean, imagine that. You're going to work every day knowing that you're the person that everyone's quietly avoiding, even though you've done nothing wrong. Kelly said the anxiety became a full-time job. Every social situation came with panic. She'd map out rooms in her head, deciding where to stand so the air wouldn't drift towards people. She stopped taking buses because the spaces were too small to hide in. The condition didn't just make her smell different, it made her feel like she didn't belong anywhere. For years, she didn't even know what it was. Doctors dismissed her, told her to shower more. One prescribed antidepressants, and none of them recognized trimethylmermeria. And when she finally got the diagnosis, she cried. Not because it was curable, it isn't, but because someone finally believed her. This condition is incredibly rare. Only a few hundred documented cases in the world, and even among those, not everyone smells all the time. Hormone, stress, even the time of the month can make the odor come and go. Scientists think it's probably more common than anyone realizes. Most people just never get diagnosed. So what can you do about it? There's no real cure. Some doctors use low-dose antibiotics to cut down the gut bacteria that produce trimethylamine. Others suggest diet changes, avoiding fish, eggs, soy, and beans. A few other people swear by probiotics and charcoal tablets, but mostly it's about managing embarrassment more than managing symptoms. Kelly learned to live with it by talking about it. She went public in 2021 to raise awareness. She said that people think we're dirty, but we're not. We're just trapped inside a smell. And that's the brutal line, but it's honest. It's easy to take pity on someone like Kelly, but I think the better reaction is respect. She wakes up every day, she goes to work, and she faces people who wrinkle their noses. And she does it anyway, because she knows what's wrong with her body and she refuses to be ashamed of it. And maybe that's the real story here. Not that she smells odd, but that she found the strength to walk through life knowing everyone can smell her, but she keeps showing up. Science can explain why her body does this, but there's still no explaining the strength it takes to live with it. But sometimes the body protects us from harm in brutal yet beautiful ways. There's a woman in Chile who went to the hospital after a small fall in her home. She was 91 years old. When the doctors took an x-ray to check her fractures, they froze. Inside her abdomen, clear as day, was the shadow of a baby. Only it wasn't a baby anymore, it had turned to stone. Her name was Estela Melendez, and what she was carrying was something called a lithopedion, or more simply, a stone baby. Decades earlier, she'd gotten pregnant. Somewhere along the way, the pregnancy failed. The fetus died, and instead of being absorbed or miscarried by the body, it settled in her abdominal cavity. Her body couldn't remove it, so it did the next best thing. It sealed it off. Over time, her immune system encased the fetus in calcium, protecting her from infection turning it hard as rock. And for more than 60 years, she carried this with her without ever knowing. And when doctors explained it, Estella was stunned. She'd always thought that the small lump in her stomach was a cyst or scar tissue. And now, at 91, she was learning that this was her unborn child, calcified, perfectly preserved, quietly part of her for most of her life. They didn't remove it because it wasn't hurting her, and at her age, surgery was pretty risky. So she lived out her final years with it still in there, the literal weight of her past locked inside her body. When reporters asked how she felt, she said softly that it's painful to know, but maybe it means he's been with me all this time. And what makes this story even stranger is that it's not unique. Cases like this go back centuries. The first recorded one was in France of 1582, a 68-year-old woman who had carried a stone baby for nearly 30 years. And since then, doctors have documented hundreds of cases worldwide. They've been found accidentally during surgeries, autopsies, even modern CT scans, sometimes after decades, and sometimes even after half a century. One woman in Colombia carried hers for about 40 years before anyone discovered it. Another in Morocco had hers for over 50. It's one of those rare medical phenomenon estimated at roughly 1 in 10 or 11 million pregnancies. And here's how it happens. In plain terms, it starts as an ectopic pregnancy, when a fertilized egg implants outside the uterus, usually in a fallopian tube or an abdominal cavity. If the fetus grows too large to be reabsorbed, the mother's body walls it off with calcium, and that layer of calcium acts like armor, keeping bacteria out, preventing decay. In a way, it's the body's performing its own kind of embalming, a defense mechanism that accidentally creates a monument. Doctors still don't know why it happens in some women and not others, but because the body often adapts, most women never know it's there until a scan finds it by accident. And think about that for a second. Decades of living, eating, sleeping, aging, all while carrying the little secret that time couldn't even touch. Estella's case made headlines because she was so old when it was found, and because she met the news with such grace. She lost her husband years earlier, and when she found out about the stone baby, she said it brought her comfort, that maybe she hadn't been as alone as she thought. And that's what makes the story weird, right? Her body had quietly kept a piece of her child safe for a lifetime. It's a tragedy, but also a weird kind of devotion. Science can explain how it happens, the calcification, the immune response, the calcium armor, but it can't explain how something so strange can also feel so tender. A baby that never took a breath, and a mother who never stopped carrying it, and a body that turned loss into something unbreakable. After hands that won't obey, minds that feel dead, explosions that no one else can hear, fires that shouldn't happen, senses that cross, faces that feel wrong, and grief that turns to stone, you see the pattern. We're miracles held together by guesses. Some of these have solid models, some don't, and all of them say the same thing. Your you is fragile and fierce at the same time. If this made you look at your body a little differently, then tell me in the comments. Tell me the strangest medical story that you've heard or lived, and I'll read them. I might even make one of them a future episode. And as always, if you like these stories and you want to hear more of history's mysteries or life's disturbing discoveries, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. I will see you in the next one. Bye!